I think the gentleman from South Carolina is misusing the word preempt. To preempt means to prevent the state law from being effective. To supplement means that you have to obey the state law and you have to obey the federal law.
Will the gentleman yield for a brief
I'm sorry, I only have 5 minutes. If the chair will yield me additional time, I will yield.
Chair will yield an additional 30 seconds.
I will yield the gentleman 30 seconds.
We had this discussion last time when Mr. Silberman was here. My state has a law that has a 2-day waiting period. They are proposing a regulation that is a 60-day waiting period. And my question is, doesn't thus the federal regulation preempt state law? And I think you would agree that it would.
No, I would not, reclaiming my time. If the federal law requires me to wear a belt and the state law requires me to wear suspenders, I will comply with both laws. If you take the position that the state legislators are in the position to provide consumer protection, then you should repeal Dodd-Frank, as I'm sure, or at least these provisions of Dodd-Frank, as I'm sure has some support on your side of the aisle. When we passed the law establishing the CFPB, we decided that in addition to following state law, which might provide a 2-day period, there will also be an additional federal law. Now, you can say that a state that decides to have no regulation in a financial area has made a conscious decision that that is the best policy for that state. But we passed a federal law to say that there will be standards. Preempt is when you tell a company they don't have to comply with state law. Supplement is when you say you have to comply with the state law, plus you must comply with the federal law. Mr. Cordray, thank you for all you do. Part of what you do is coming here to Congress so that we can comment on what you do and perhaps help you do an even better job.
I think I just learned from you a little bit, so I appreciate that.
Okay. Now, as to Mr. Stiver's letter, there are some who say that that letter signed by many of us, and I want to say I signed the letter, and I'm a step ahead of you. I've read the letter. It does cite Code Section 1022B3 and quotes it accurately, and some have said, well, therefore, it's in favor of exempting some of the smaller institutions, so toddlers wouldn't be wearing shirts at all. But in fact, what it calls for is look at each regulation, determine whether you can have a one-size-fits-all regulation. I buy hats and one-size-fits-all, or shirts need to be tailored to the right size. Yeah. And the only ask in the letter is to be sure that your regulations don't have unintended consequences. And the specific focus is that when you write a regulation and you would want a different regulation or a different approach for smaller institutions, that you have a portion of the regulation applicable to smaller institutions.
That's sound advice, and it's something we will continue to try to heed, yes.
And there may be individual circumstances where we bring to your attention.
And we'll be glad to take input on that in particular issues, yeah.
We talked a couple days ago, you've urged financial institutions to use text messages, and thank you for saying you'll go to the FCC and make sure that the FCC will allow financial institutions to use text messages. If I can get a text message from my bank telling me I'm about to overdraft my account, I'll pay my phone company a nickel to get that information. I want to focus on TRID. These are complicated regulations. They're particularly complicated for smaller financial institutions. I want to commend you for having the hold harmless period. And institutions would like to get more written guidance as to how to apply the regs and what remediation steps they should take when remediation is necessary. We've talked about the hold harmless period continuing, and I think you should continue the hold harmless period at least until you can issue the interpretations necessary to provide written guidance.
That may go on forever, but we'll continue to be very attentive to the industry, and we've encouraged them to bring us their prioritized
at least as long as it takes to to answer the questions that have emerged in the, in the first 4 months. Obviously, some new question could come up. And finally, as we've talked, the regulations require an inaccurate statement as to the cost of title insurance in those states like California, where there's a buyer's policy and a owner's policy, and you get a discount on the owner's policy when you get the lender's policy. To correct the record, there's a lender's policy and there's a buyer's policy.
I was actually reminded I gave you an extra 30 seconds, so you got 14 to...
Oh. Thank you.
Go to town.
So in any case, Mr. Cordray, you will be looking to make sure that the regulations deal with the situation where there's a stated price for the policy the buyer of the home is going to pay for, but there's an automatic discount that what's disclosed is the net price that the
I know that's an issue that's been under active consideration during the rulemaking process and I believe since.
The time of the